What if the Jedi Order started following the rule of two around the era of the Phantom Menace? That is our story for today, and let's get right into this one. Our story begins on Tatooine, as the twin suns are scorching the ground, as they always do, and as the warm wind was blowing the grains of sand all around, young Anakin Skywalker was moving into a local town where he was hoping to sell some scavenged junk from an abandoned speeder that he found. Anakin, now 15 years old, was using his one day off the week from Watto's constant demands to try and make some credits for himself, in hopes of someday getting off this rock. He knew it was unlikely, but he had to try, ever since his mother died around a year ago from a sickness that Watto refused to help pay treatment for. Anakin has been determined to leave all of this behind. But today, as he was walking to a local pawn shop, he bumped into a very drunk man with a long beard and even longer hair. The man grunted an apology, but Anakin just kept moving until a couple of local thugs cornered him, telling Anakin to give up his scrap or they'll beat him and take it anyways. Anakin knew these guys. He knew they were serious. But Anakin was not one to get bullied. He dropped his bag and he went right in for a punch on one of the thugs, a Rodian at least twice his age. Anakin hit across his jaw, and his partner, a Serenno man, grabbed his arm, twisted it, and kicked Anakin's legs out from under him. But Anakin landed hard on his back, then he grabbed the Serenno's leg, pulled him to the ground. But then the Rodian would kick Anakin right in the ribs, and his breath was knocked out of him. This allowed both thugs to kick him while he was down. Anakin felt each kick, and it felt like he was going to die here, but he heard an unfamiliar yet amazing sound suddenly. A plasma weapon ignited from nearby, and the drunk, bearded man from earlier ran right in, stabbing the Rodian through the chest and shoving him to the ground. The Rodian screamed out as he fell dead, and the Serenno pulled out a blaster, firing at the man. The blast shattered the bottle of liquor that the man was holding, but it at least allowed him to put both hands on the lightsaber, swinging for the Serenno. He missed a swing and nearly stumbled onto his face from how drunk he was, but he turned in time to cut the blaster of the Serenno away. The man was able to swing up just enough to cut across him, and then he too fell dead. Anakin finally sat up. He was in awe of this man, but then he saw a Weequay pirate approaching from behind, blaster aimed at the man, and something would click inside of Anakin, something of pure instinct. He reached his hands out, and he used some sort of force to push this Weequay extremely hard into a building behind him. He crashed into the wall, falling forward unconscious or dead. And the man with the green lightsaber turned in shock, surprise, and fear as he looked upon Anakin Skywalker, and he felt his immense power. All of a sudden, this man felt completely sober, and for the first time in years, he remembered himself and his old life. Former Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn felt the Force calling to him, guiding him for the first time in so long. This brought him horrible, terrible memories of the Jedi that he's tried to drown with alcohol, and Qui-Gon refused to accept this. He shook it off, turning away from Anakin, hurrying back to his home just outside of this town. But young Anakin watched him go, and it didn't take long for him to decide to follow the man home. For around a mile, Anakin walked through the Tatooine sands, out to a remote cave, where the man eventually stopped and went inside. Qui-Gon Jinn was feeling panic, fear, sadness, regret, pain, for so much. He got to a basket in his home, he opened it, and for the first time in years, he would look upon the lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi, his former Padawan, and then he heard something behind him. The boy stumbled into his home, and he asked Qui-Gon a simple question. He asked if he was a Jedi. Qui-Gon was still for a moment, but finally he said the Jedi are dead. He knew he should kick this child out of here, but there was something about this boy, something warm, something light, that he hasn't felt in so long. Anakin walked in, sitting down, clearly not one for manners, and he asked Qui-Gon what happened to the Jedi. He grew up knowing that they were legends, heroes, but then the rumors said they all just disappeared. And for reasons he didn't quite understand, Qui-Gon began telling Anakin everything, as if he has known this kid for longer than just a few minutes. Around 7 years ago, Qui-Gon Jinn embarked on a solo mission, guided by the Force, to become something new and powerful. He was personally selected by the Force itself to learn to achieve life after death as a spirit in the Force. Qui-Gon embarked on this mission on an important day for the Jedi. It was the yearly conference, where every Jedi returns to the Temple Grand Hall to hear the words of the Grand Master, as he declares the outlook for the coming weeks, months, and year for the Order. Qui-Gon had been to enough of these, and he knew Yoda well enough to get the recap whenever he returns. But when Qui-Gon eventually did return to Coruscant after his mission with the Force, the entire Jedi Temple was in complete lockdown and quarantine, and Qui-Gon learned that somehow someone had recreated the legendary Blue Shadow virus, and the virus was put into the water supply of the temple. What started as a peaceful conference ended in catastrophe. Every single Jedi was infected, and in order to stop the spread, the Council made the impossible choice to lock down the temple and accept their fate. So, when Qui-Gon returned, he spoke to Obi-Wan, Yoda, Plo, Windu, so many Jedi via hologram, as doctors and everyone available was scrambling for a cure. But by the time the cure was ready, it was too late. Every single Jedi was gone, and the guilt of being the only survivor plagued Qui-Gon. He hated the Force for pulling him away from the Order in their moment of destruction. He didn't understand. Why was he the one to survive? Qui-Gon convinced himself that the Force made a mistake. It was the will of the Force that the Jedi die out. He was supposed to go with them, he told himself. So, he did, becoming a shell of himself, abandoning the Jedi way. And as the Jedi died, the Force seemed to abandon him as well. Qui-Gon became lost, traveling from rundown world after world, drowning himself in alcohol and skirmishes for 7 years. And then, all of a sudden, today, the Force has returned to him when he found this boy. Qui-Gon began to remember the prophecy of the Chosen One, a prophecy he learned about during his mission to become a Force spirit. And so, as Qui-Gon stared at this boy, Anakin Skywalker, extremely powerful in the Force, he felt hope, and he wondered if perhaps a different way forward is possible. A Jedi Order thousands strong could be a mistake. It can all be wiped out in one maneuver, whether it be a virus or an army designed to fight them. It could be anything. Qui-Gon realized that it may be easier to destroy something strong in number than something that is smaller, something that is only two. One Jedi Master to embody the light, and a Jedi Padawan to preserve it. A rule of two, much like the ancient legends of the Sith. So, Qui-Gon looked to Anakin, and he told the 15-year-old boy that the Force has brought them together, and he must be trained. 1 year later, Qui-Gon Jinn and Anakin Skywalker were in the midst of a skirmish on a forest moon called Avinda, battling back pirates that had long been interfering with the local farmers of this moon. This mission had gone on for weeks, and finally, the Master and Padawan found the home of these pirates, and they were driving them off of this world. After a final battle, the pirates were forced to evacuate or surrender, and when it was over, Qui-Gon looked to Anakin with great pride. His Padawan has come a long way in this year, and he recalled when the training began. Anakin was extremely reckless, impatient, full of emotions, hidden beneath the surface. The two of them stayed on Tatooine for months, until Anakin mastered patience, and learned to truly find and control the Force, instead of the Force controlling him. Qui-Gon completely sobered up after finding this purpose in his life. He, too, focused on finding the Force again, and he would discover that the light is still shining bright enough if he dives deep enough. And over the year, Anakin began training with Obi-Wan's old lightsaber, and although Anakin struggled to balance the Force inside of him, his abilities with the lightsaber were unbelievable. Where he lacked patience, his skills with the blade stepped in to protect him many times, as they fought many criminals and pirates on Tatooine, and they eventually ventured off of the Sand World, moving through the Outer Rim, reigniting the spark of light in the galaxy. And as the pirates were sent away from Avinda, Qui-Gon decided it was time that he returned to something he'd ignored for far too long. He was not planning on revealing himself, or Anakin, back to the galaxy yet. The two Jedi would live in secrecy for the time being, but there was something gnawing at Qui-Gon. He wanted to find out who it was that poisoned the Jedi Temple. He wanted to bring them to justice. The current findings stated that it was a temple worker, though the exact person went unnamed. None of the temple workers were absent that day. So, the assumption was that this worker poisoned the Jedi and chose to die with them. But Qui-Gon wasn't sure of that theory anymore. As he and Anakin traveled the galaxy, Qui-Gon was feeling a darkness that he never really felt before. Unbeknownst to him, the Sith had returned to the galaxy under the name of Darth Sidious, currently ruling as Chancellor Palpatine. But because Qui-Gon never encountered the Sith on Naboo, he had no reason to think that the Sith have returned. So he decided they will return to the core worlds, but they will stay hidden. Qui-Gon just needed to see the truth. And as they moved into the core, Anakin was astounded at just how large the galaxy truly was. For all of his life, all Anakin has known is sand and remote worlds, with smaller populations, without much of a central government. But the core was so different. Anakin would learn all about the Republic under Palpatine, a man Qui-Gon was largely unfamiliar with, but Qui-Gon could still tell Anakin all about the Senate, how the government functions, or at least is supposed to function. And over the years, especially most recently, the Republic seemed to be stripping away freedoms one world at a time. But that was not a problem that two Jedi could solve today. And overall, the ventures into the core worlds would not lend Qui-Gon much insight into the truth about the Temple Plague. Qui-Gon spoke to a young senator called Dorian Dagonet, a man he had a past with, and a man he trusted to keep the secret of the return of the Jedi. Dagonet accessed the files on the Temple Plague, and everything pointed to it being a temple worker who brought the virus into the temple, likely someone who worked in the hangar. There was only one thing of interest, and it was a smaller ship entering and leaving the temple on the morning of the plague. There were unfortunately no readings of who the ship belonged to or where it came from, but something about it was familiar to Qui-Gon. He couldn't put his finger on it, and ultimately decided it was nothing for now. It was similar to a Naboo royal transport, only smaller, as if meant for just a couple of people. But when Qui-Gon was satisfied in his thinking that the culprit died in the plague, he and Anakin left the core once Anakin had a solid understanding of how the galaxy worked. And from here, his training would only get more advanced. Qui-Gon was taking Anakin all across the galaxy, around the mid and outer rim, and every day they seemed to be moving more and more. Some days were quiet, and on these days, Qui-Gon would have Anakin meditate in forests, deserts, lakes, even crowded cities, so he could feel how the Force moves differently in all living things. Whether it be tiny insects, wild animals, plants, people, Anakin mastered the ability to feel the Force early on, but to feel it in every environment was different. Other days were much more dangerous. They fought pirates, slavers, people loyal to crime lords, as they all crossed their paths often, and Qui-Gon slowly allowed Anakin to step forward more and more in these moments. In the first year of skirmishes, Qui-Gon always took the lead, but now he was giving Anakin more freedom. The boy learned quickly, and although he carried an obvious darkness deep inside of him, Qui-Gon was the perfect Jedi to keep it locked away. But there was no denying the anger, the loss, and the deep desire to belong somewhere that lived inside of Anakin. The days would blend, and as the years passed by, the two of them developed a routine that felt almost like a familiar life together. Qui-Gon taught, Anakin listened. Sometimes they'd argue, they'd laugh, and Anakin constantly asked questions about the old Jedi Order, and Qui-Gon tried to answer honestly but carefully. And while Qui-Gon deeply missed many of the Jedi, including his former Padawan Obi-Wan, he refused to truly romanticize the past. He told Anakin, the Jedi made many mistakes. They lost their connection to the people they were meant to protect, and with the living Force. Still, they did not deserve their fate, but it was the fate they suffered. And now, the Jedi are on a new path of two. Anakin asked what the future will look like once Qui-Gon is gone. The words were not easy for Anakin to get out, as he feared loss, but Qui-Gon said it will then become Anakin's responsibility to carry the light forward and find a new Padawan, but he will always be with him. And they continued traveling. They would help refugees escape a war zone on Fordon. They brought medical supplies to a colony on a moon of Bogdan, abandoned by the Republic. Qui-Gon made it clear that they're not rulers or soldiers. They're simply two people trying to protect others where they can and find their place in this galaxy as this new version of the Jedi. Feel the living Force guide them through the worlds. Anakin began to understand that this is what Qui-Gon believes the Jedi should have been all along. Not exactly the rule of two, but an order that follows the will of the Force, not the will of the Senate. More years would go by, and their relationship would deepen with time. Anakin saw Qui-Gon as more than a teacher. Qui-Gon knew this, and it weighed on him. He knew the boy wanted something more from him, like a father figure of sorts. Sometimes Qui-Gon came close to stepping into that role fully, especially during quiet moments, where they shared memories by a fire, or sat in the cockpit during long hyperspace trips. But he always held a small distance between them, believing that Anakin must grow strong enough to stand on his own someday as the master of this order. And over the years, They both began to notice how the galaxy began to feel more and more darker as they traveled. Conflicts became more common as Republic intervention was becoming more rare. Crime syndicates became stronger. Entire regions seemed unstable. Qui-Gon sensed it clearly in the Force, though he could not exactly explain it. Anakin felt it too, but he experienced it more emotionally. He felt anger rising in people everywhere they went, fear spreading through the galaxy. The Force around them was heavier. Something seemed to be in motion. And by the time Anakin was around 24 years old, the two of them had spent nearly a decade together, traveling the galaxy, training, building up this new version of the Jedi, keeping the secret of the Jedi known to only a few. Qui-Gon trusted Anakin in ways he never expected to trust anyone again. Anakin respected Qui-Gon more than anyone in the galaxy. When his mother died, he expected to be alone for the rest of his life. That's what he thought he wanted. But even as the light between them grew, the disturbances in the Force continued to be too much to ignore. During quiet meditation on remote worlds, Qui-Gon sensed a presence in the Force that he hadn't felt in many years. A presence he has not allowed himself to visit or pursue, all to keep the secret of the Jedi hidden away from the galaxy and from politics. But today, the presence was overwhelming in the Force of Count Dooku. Qui-Gon would open his eyes slowly, realizing that if anyone in the galaxy might understand what is happening in the Force, it would be the man who trained him so long ago. Of course, Dooku was not in the temple when the plague happened. He was no longer a Jedi at that point. He must have just been on Serenno. And for the first time in years, Qui-Gon began to consider seeking out his former master. This would be the first time that he and Anakin truly proclaimed the return of the Jedi if they go to a government leader like Dooku. For all of the skirmishes and fights they've been in, it was never enough to cause a huge stir regarding the Jedi returning. And so they would begin a trip to Serenno. And on Serenno, Count Dooku was standing in his castle, looking out of the large window. For the last couple of years, he has heard the rumors of the return of the Jedi. These descriptions of these Jedi made Dooku think that Qui-Gon could still be alive. Dooku didn't believe it at first. All of the Jedi were supposed to have been in the temple on the day that the plague hit. So, Dooku began reaching out with the Force, calling to his former Padawan, trying to connect in them and bridge their minds. If Qui-Gon is alive, he will come here, to him. Darth Sidious has assured him as much. In recent years, Dooku and Sidious have begun accelerating things inside of the Republic government. They were secretly giving more power to crime syndicates that Darth Maul was leading, and in time, they hope to create a war between the Republic and these syndicates that can push the Republic into becoming an empire. Sidious would rule, with Dooku by his side. They will build a new order in time, a Sith order. The galaxy, for now, thinks they're better off without Jedi, but war will come, and the new Sith order will fight for them, and then the Sith will truly rule the galaxy. Moments later, as Dooku was imagining the future, a ship entered the atmosphere, and Dooku would turn to the hooded man in the throne room, telling him he was right. The Jedi are here. He can sense Qui-Gon, and he can sense the raw power inside of the Padawan. With any luck, this boy will be theirs to command soon. And in the clouds, the freighter with Qui-Gon and Anakin moved to a landing pad, as Anakin was studying this planet below. Vast stretches of green land and shining lakes covered the surface. It was beautiful, and an elegant city sat beyond the forests. It looked nothing like the harsh worlds they'd spent so many years traveling through. And as Anakin turned to his master, he felt a tension that he rarely felt inside of him. Qui-Gon knew he was taking a risk, revealing the Jedi to someone as influential as Dooku, but he needed help working through this darkness. Anakin and Qui-Gon would speak for a bit, as Anakin asked if he was alright. Qui-Gon gave him a confident smile, saying he will be. A couple of castle guards guided them into Dooku's castle, leading them into a chamber where a single figure stood near the far window, hands clasped behind his back, as he looked out over the distant city. The man turned slowly to greet them with surprise. Dooku looked far older than the last time Qui-Gon had seen him, but he still carried himself with the same quiet strength. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and then Dooku walked forward with a welcoming smile, embracing his former Padawan, saying he couldn't believe his eyes. He always thought Qui-Gon died on that terrible day with the others. Qui-Gon shook his head, remembering all of it, saying the Force guided him elsewhere that day. Dooku looked at Anakin, saying that perhaps the Force also guided him to this boy. Anakin sarcastically said he's not a little boy anymore. Qui-Gon has trained him to become a true Jedi Knight. Dooku studied him carefully, thinking Anakin to be a bit immature, but still, he remarked that the boy is surrounded by the Force, much more than most other Jedi that he remembers. Qui-Gon admitted that he has trained with Anakin for many years, and Dooku held a look of surprise, asking Qui-Gon if he truly chose to continue the ways of the Jedi, even after their destruction. Is he again growing in order on another world? Qui-Gon hesitated, then said there were many years where he was lost, many years where he thought the Force meant to destroy the Jedi. But the will of the Force brought him and Anakin together, and he has restarted the Order as an Order of Two, no more, no less. Now Dooku's eyes went wide with intrigue, saying that is the way of the Sith, is it not? Qui-Gon said that may be true, but to him, it is the best way forward, at least for now. And the Sith are actually a reason he has come here today. There is a darkness growing in this galaxy, and Qui-Gon asked Dooku if he had felt it. Dooku shrugged this off a bit, then guided them to a table overlooking the gardens, where food and drinks have been prepared, saying they truly have much to discuss. For a while the conversation was warm. Dooku said he doesn't know of any darkness, and he asked Qui-Gon about his travels across the galaxy. Qui-Gon spoke about the people they've helped, the worlds they've seen. Anakin listened quietly, occasionally answering Dooku's questions about his own training. But beneath the calm conversation, Qui-Gon felt something strange. Dooku spoke of the fall of the Jedi with an unsettling calmness. There was a sadness in his voice, but not any shock, not any regret, almost a sadness of regret for the life he has lived since then. Almost as if the event did not surprise him. At one point, Dooku mentioned how Coruscant felt so peaceful on the day that everything happened with the Jedi. Qui-Gon didn't know Dooku was on Coruscant that day, and as his suspicions rose, Qui-Gon excused himself, saying he has brought Dooku a gift that he accidentally left in his ship, and he will go now to retrieve it. Anakin will keep Dooku company in the meantime. And Qui-Gon hurried back down to the landing pad, but he didn't go to his ship. Instead, he turned into the royal hangar, and he found dozens of ships here that belonged to high-ranking Serenno officials. Qui-Gon hurried through the hangar, looking from ship to ship, until he came upon one that he recognized. It was the ship from the temple records on the day the virus hit, the only unauthorized ship that went in and out of the temple that day. Qui-Gon had to grab the wall to stop himself from falling over. He felt sick. Dooku was the one who poisoned the temple. Dooku killed the Jedi, and he must be the one now poisoning the galaxy with the dark side. Qui-Gon's eyes suddenly went wide, remembering he just left Anakin all alone with Dooku. Qui-Gon sprinted up the stairs, and he burst through the castle doors, only to find he was too late. Dooku stood with a regretful look on his face, saying he is sorry, but the Jedi Order simply had to die. He hoped to find Qui-Gon come here today in agreement that the Order had to go, but instead, he is choosing to rebuild. Qui-Gon looked to the wall, where a hooded man was holding a fearful Anakin Skywalker, and Dooku would tell Qui-Gon to surrender his weapon, or the boy dies. Qui-Gon breathed in. He felt the light, he felt the Force, and he would calm his mind as he breathed out. He looked to Anakin, giving his boy a familiar smile, and then Qui-Gon would throw his weapon away. He knew Anakin would not understand this decision right now, but Qui-Gon was seeing one way out of this. He's lived a long life. He has returned to the will of the Force, and he knew Anakin was ready to carry the light forward while he guides him from beyond. It was time for the rule of two to serve its purpose. His time has come. And then Dooku said again he is sorry, and he blasted lightning right into Qui-Gon, throwing him into the wall as Qui-Gon fell to the floor, and Dooku ignited his red blade. Anakin tried to go and help, but Darth Sidious held him in place with the Force, smiling as he watched Dooku descend further into the dark side. Their plans were all coming together. Qui-Gon slowly got to his feet, telling Dooku something that gave Dooku a bit of a chill. He said, "If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." And then Anakin Skywalker watched in horror as Dooku plunged his red blade into Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon locked eyes with Anakin as he fell to the floor, dying. Sidious laughed, and then he blasted heavy lightning into Anakin, making Anakin crash to the floor. Sidious told Anakin he will learn to harness his pain. He will become a powerful Sith, and the lightning caused Anakin immense pain indeed. But as he writhed on the floor, looking at his master, something in him would snap. something in him that had been there since he was born. Suddenly, he didn't feel the lightning burning him, and everything went silent in his mind. He felt the power inside of himself that he always kept hidden. Anakin then reached out his hand, pulling Qui-Gon's blade into his hand, and his own blade into the other hand. And then, through the lightning, Anakin jumped backwards, igniting both blades at once, stabbing them backwards into the chest of Sidious. The lightning ceased. The power was beyond anything Sidious expected, and Dooku looked on in surprise, but with a small smile. He would rule the galaxy without Sidious. And as his body fell to the floor, Dooku told Anakin he could feel his darkness. It makes him strong, powerful, and he must learn to truly use it. Anakin knew from his decade of training that he should not give in to these feelings. But as he looked at Qui-Gon, dead on the floor, he simply didn't care about that right now. Anakin attacked, and Dooku met the attack easily, deflecting it with smooth swings. Anakin moved forward in a storm of rage. His attacks came quickly, wildly, each swing driven by grief and anger. The Force pushed through him violently, fueling his strength but scattering his focus. Every strike meant to kill. To Dooku, the anger inside of Anakin was exactly what he hoped to see. It showed how powerful the young man could become if he fully embraced the dark side building inside of him, if he learned to control it. Dooku allowed the fight to stretch on, testing Anakin, forcing him to push deeper into his rage. And Anakin's attacks, though powerful, lacked balance. The anger clouded him. His strikes grew more reckless as he tried to overwhelm his opponent through sheer force. But then, something in him shifted. Through the chaos of his emotions, Anakin felt a familiar presence in his mind. It was gentle, steady, cutting through the storm inside of him. It was Qui-Gon, and his master calmed his mind, telling Anakin to be the light, to embody the light. Anakin felt his master's presence, he heard his voice, and the fury that had driven his attacks slowly faded, becoming something balanced. The duel shifted. Dooku blocked the first several attacks, but quickly realized the advantage he once held was disappearing. Anakin's strikes were now faster, sharper, and for the first time in this battle, Dooku was forced to retreat. Anakin pressed forward. He cut through Dooku's robes, throwing him to the floor with the Force, telling him to surrender. But moments later, the entire castle shook violently. A blast of fire tore through one side of the castle wall as a starship hovered outside the shattered opening. Guns fired into the chamber, forcing Anakin to dive for cover as Dooku launched himself backward through the broken wall, landed inside of the waiting ship. Blaster fire continued pouring into the chamber, preventing Anakin from reaching this ship before it lifted off into the air. And within seconds, the ship disappeared into the clouds above Serenno, and Anakin stood alone in the castle as he fell to his knees beside his fallen master, promising to him he will carry on the legacy. He will find a new Padawan, and he will continue the rule of two. But soon, out in the wider galaxy, the Senate and the people of the Republic would hear a very different version of the events that had taken place on Serenno. Count Dooku was a trusted man, and he appeared before the Galactic Senate. He stated that a rogue survivor of the Jedi Order had violently assassinated the Chancellor during a confrontation inside of the Serenno Castle. The young Jedi, Dooku explained, had been driven unstable by the destruction of the Order, and he lashed out in rage, blaming Palpatine for it. Clearly he was delusional, dangerous, and the Senate would respond with fear and outrage. The Jedi were already viewed by many as dangerous remnants of a fallen era, thanks to heavy propaganda from the Palpatine government, and Dooku offered a solution to the crisis. To protect the Republic from further Jedi violence, he proposed the creation of a new galactic security force dedicated to tracking down rogue Jedi and eliminating them. And at the very top of his list of priorities was the man he declared responsible for the Chancellor's death, Anakin Skywalker. On the world of Harun Kal, a highly populated world, but certainly not one that was extremely well kept. But Anakin Skywalker came here around one standard week ago, and as Anakin sat down for a quick meal while his ship was undergoing some routine maintenance, he realized it has been 1 year since Qui-Gon has died, and he failed to defeat Dooku in his castle. In this past year, the galaxy changed faster than anyone could have imagined. The death of Chancellor Palpatine shook the Republic to its core, and the story that followed spread across the HoloNet within just hours. According to the official reports, a rogue survivor of the Jedi Order had stormed the castle of Count Dooku, murdering the Chancellor in a violent outburst during a meeting to bring Dooku into a higher role for the Republic. Masamita backed up these reports. The Jedi, long believed extinct by then, were suddenly feared. The name Anakin Skywalker became known across the galaxy as a dangerous criminal who unleashed chaos on the Republic. The Republic had already been struggling with rising crime, political instability, and growing conflict between systems. With Palpatine dead, many senators feared the government itself might fall into civil war. But luckily, Dooku stepped forward and promised to restore order, rebuild trust in the Republic, and eliminate the threat of rogue Force users. His reputation as a former Jedi Master who left the Order gave his words weight, and his calm confidence reassured a rather frightened Senate. Within weeks, he announced his candidacy for Chancellor, and of course, Dooku won the election. The Republic wanted stability. Dooku offered exactly that, and once in office, he was granted emergency powers by the Senate to deal with the growing unrest and fear of the Jedi that was growing across the galaxy. And under these powers, he created a new Republic Security Initiative designed to protect citizens from Force-sensitive threats. Officially, the organization existed to hunt down dangerous individuals who abused the Force. Unofficially, it became the foundation for a dream Dooku has long had of a new Sith Order. The Order would first be used to tear apart Darth Maul and his crime syndicate, with Dooku leading it. For a long time, Dooku considered reuniting with Maul after his fallout with the Sith long ago, but instead, he and his Order would hunt and eventually kill Maul, proving their worth to this Republic, and his crime empire would die without him. And unlike the Sith of legend, this new Order was not built through careful training or strict tradition. Dooku just gathered Force-sensitive individuals from across the galaxy who were warriors seeking purpose, and many were simply people who had discovered their connection to the Force but had nowhere else to turn. They were taught to channel anger and fear, to use the dark side as a weapon, and to obey the authority of the new Chancellor. Most of them were inexperienced and reckless, but there were many of them, and that made them dangerous. Their purpose was simple: find Anakin Skywalker, and for the entire year they had tried. But Anakin never remained in one place since the night of Qui-Gon's death. The galaxy he once traveled with curiosity and wonder was hostile territory. Every world carried the risk of discovery and fighting. Republic patrol ships were searching all over their worlds for him. Bounties were posted, and wherever he went, Dooku's dark warriors followed. Anakin had fought quite a few battles during this year. Most of these Sith hunters were just angry fighters who relied on brute strength and emotion. Anakin defeated them rather easily, and he'd faced dozens of them across the mid and outer rims. But the victories didn't exactly bring him peace. Anakin made a promise to his fallen master, Qui-Gon Jinn. He would carry the light forward. He would continue the rule of two. He would find a new Padawan and begin rebuilding the Jedi in the way that Qui-Gon believed they should exist. Yet after a year of searching, he'd failed. He'd visited worlds across the Mid-Rim, searching for signs of Force sensitivity in children and young adults. He'd spent weeks observing people that he believed might carry the spark of the Force. But every time he came close, the circumstances were wrong. Some were already lost to the darkness spreading across the galaxy. Others were simply not strong enough in the Force to walk the path he needed them to follow. The truth was far harder for Anakin to admit. Part of him was afraid. Training someone meant becoming what Qui-Gon had been for him. And after losing Qui-Gon, after losing his mother, the thought of that responsibility weighed heavily on him. So the search continued without success. He would finish his meal here today, and he would move back towards the fueling station. He kept his head low as he walked, scanning the area as always. But then he felt a strong disturbance in the Force. On the fueling pad, figures were stepping out from behind cargo containers and ships. 10 of them, each one carrying a red blade at their side. The Sith warriors have found him again, and this was a larger group than ever before. The Sith warriors would spread out in a slow circle around Anakin. Anakin remained still at the center of the circle, and he told them that this is their last chance to turn back. The circle tightened slowly, and Anakin sighed. So be it. His blade ignited, and the Sith would rush forward together, blades swinging down as they yelled out with their power and their anger. Anakin flung his saber around, ducking under a strike and stabbing upward into a warrior before flipping over 2 more, throwing them to the ground with a hard push. Anakin held back one blade with his own, and another by grabbing the wrist of his attacker, and he watched as something strange happened behind them. A young Sith woman, standing near the edge of the group, suddenly lunged forward, but instead of attacking Anakin, she spun, driving her blade straight through the back of a Sith that that was moving beside her. The woman tore her blade free and immediately turned on another attacker, cutting him down before the others even understood what has happened here. The distraction allowed Anakin to defeat the two Sith fighting him, and the last of the Sith charged in desperation, attacking the woman for only a moment before she slid her weapon down the man's shoulder and cut him down. The only sounds remaining were of the two lightsabers in distant fuel and maintenance areas. The woman turned to Anakin. She knelt down, asking Anakin to take her in. She would introduce herself as Trilla Siduri, and she joined the ranks of the Sith Order solely to try and get to Anakin, because there's always been something inside of her, not just the Force, but something else, a light, a desire to help the galaxy, a desire to be what the Jedi of old were said to be. Anakin reached out through the Force, and what he felt inside of her was not exactly peaceful. Her presence churned with conflict, layers of anger, fear, and survival, all twisted together, and beneath it all was raw power, strong and untamed. Anakin felt the danger in it, the same danger he'd spent years mastering within himself. But as he searched deeper, past the chaos and scars that surrounded her spirit, he felt something else at the center. It was faint but unmistakable, a small but stubborn light, buried but alive, waiting for someone strong enough to reach in and find it. And in that moment, Anakin understood that Trilla was exactly who he has been searching for. So he told her to come with him. Their new journey can begin. And as Trilla walked alongside Anakin, she had to hide her smile. Dooku would be so proud of her, as over 1 year earlier, Trilla was recruited to join the Sith by Dooku while Sidious was still alive. And when Sidious died, she was there to save Dooku from his castle and become the true Sith apprentice. She barely missed being a Jedi before they fell, and in this Sith Order, she'd stood apart from others. And not long ago, Dooku summoned Trilla privately to his chamber on Serenno, as someone was beginning to question for greater things. Rumors had begun spreading that the rogue Jedi Anakin Skywalker was moving through the Outer Rim, defeating every Sith hunter sent after him. People in the galaxy were fearing him more and more. Killing Skywalker would not be easy. It would have to be done from the inside. He would have to be torn down, betrayed. And over time, as Trilla earned more and more trust in Dooku, and before long, Dooku explained that the next hunting party would include her, but her role would not be the same as the others. If the opportunity arose, she would approach Skywalker as a defector, claiming to seek the path of the Jedi. Skywalker was known to be searching for a Padawan, and Dooku believed the young man's compassion would make him vulnerable. Trilla would gain his trust, stay close to him, and when the moment eventually comes, they will destroy Skywalker together. If successful, she would not only eliminate the last Jedi in the galaxy, but prove herself worthy of standing as the true Sith apprentice, and someday, the Sith Master. But her undercover journey would begin, and the rule of two would live on. One Jedi to embody the light, and the apprentice to preserve it. The training began almost immediately, not in temples or grand halls like the old order, but in the same way Qui-Gon had trained Anakin, out in the galaxy. At first, Trilla struggled more than Anakin expected. Her connection to the Force was strong, but it had been twisted by the teachings of the Sith. She was used to reaching into anger when she fought, letting frustration guide her movements, using fear to dominate opponents. Anakin stripped that away, piece by piece. Some days, they would land on remote worlds, where Anakin would force her to sit for hours in silence, feeling the living force around them. Whenever she struggled, Anakin smiled to himself, remembering how he grew up with Qui-Gon. The age difference here was much different, as when he trained with Qui-Gon, Anakin was only a boy. But Trilla and Anakin were only a few years separated. It was different, but Anakin became quite comfortable. The silence in these meditation sessions would make Trilla confront thoughts that she'd buried for years. But Anakin remained patient, teaching her the same way Qui-Gon always taught him, and slowly the anger inside of her stopped controlling her altogether. It would never disappear, but she learned at least to hold it back. And Anakin truly did miss his old master, but he knew Qui-Gon lived on in the Force, always watching. Other days, lessons would be harder. Anakin would spar with her, forcing her to abandon the aggressive techniques that the Sith had taught her, and find a true form. When she struck with anger, he would disarm her. When she lost focus, he would knock her flat on the ground. And over, he pushed her, until she understood that the Force was not something to dominate. It was something to listen to, something that flowed through every single living being. Slowly, her fighting style changed. Movements were smoother, more balanced, and the fury that drove her was fading into controlled power. And against all odds, Trilla would find herself having fun. It was a feeling she was unfamiliar with, but Anakin was so unlike anyone she'd ever met. Strong, funny, without judgment, and not pressuring her, but training her patiently. During those long months of training, Anakin also began learning all about Trilla herself. No one had ever really asked about her life before. To the Sith, she had been nothing more than a weapon, but Anakin wanted to understand her, and during long hyperspace jumps, they talked about the worlds they'd seen, the places they'd grown up, and the lives they had before the Force found them. Trilla spoke about her home, and the world ruled by crime syndicates, where survival depended on strength and obedience. Anakin listened, recognizing pieces of his own past in many of her stories. Trilla grew up on a planet called Antotho, a small Outer Rim world, rich in resources, but constantly exploited by criminal cartels that stripped the planet dry. The people of Antotho had spent decades living under the control of these organizations. Their government collapsed under corruption, and Anakin could feel the anger inside of her surfacing again as they spoke of this world. So, Anakin made a decision that the Jedi of old would not have approved of. They will go back there. It had been months into their training when their ship arrived in the atmosphere of Antotho, and Trilla was quiet as she looked down at the forests and mountains of the world below. It had been many years since she'd seen it. Much of the planet looked unchanged, but the cities were larger now, with massive mining operations carved into the land. The criminal empire that controlled the planet had only grown stronger, but what followed would not be a single battle to eliminate them, but rather a campaign that lasted many weeks, alongside rebel groups of this planet that just needed an extra push from these Jedi to help them. Anakin and Trilla moved through the cities and the industrial areas all over Antotho, and the local rebel groups that had been hiding for years rose up with them. By the time the final strongholds of the criminal empire fell, the people of Antotho had begun reclaiming control over their world. Weeks of fighting back resulted in victory, and when it was over, Trilla genuinely would hug Anakin. Her life under the crime empire here was so awful. All she ever wanted was freedom for these good people, and Anakin helped her to do it. So with a smile, she brought Anakin to a small settlement where her family still lived. Her parents had believed she was long gone, and seeing her again felt almost unreal to them. But as the evening continued, the shock gave way to pride and happiness for the path their daughter was now on. The people understood who had helped free their world, and that night after the settlement erupted into celebration, fires would be lit across the galaxy, music filled the air, and for the first time in many years, the people here celebrated. Anakin stood among them quietly, watching Trilla laugh and speak with her family, and for the first time since he'd met her, he looked truly at peace. She looked at him with something in her eyes that Anakin hadn't seen before, and from that point on, the bond between Master and Padawan only grew deeper. They traveled together for many more months, continuing their work across the Outer Rim. Trilla's training continued, and with each passing week, she grew stronger in the light. Her instincts sharpened, her patience grew. Anakin trusted her more and more with every mission. But as their bond grew, so did the conflict inside of her, the guilt. Trilla had not forgotten the mission that Dooku gave her. She'd been sent to infiltrate Skywalker, gain his trust, destroy him from within, learn what he is trying to build. That had been her purpose when she joined the group sent to Harun Kal. But the more time she spent learning from him, fighting beside him, and seeing the way he tried to help people across the galaxy, the harder it became to see the things the way the Sith had told her. Anakin Skywalker was not the monster the Republic thought he was. He was a Jedi, and slowly, against all expectations, Trilla realized something that deeply troubled her. She'd begun to truly, deeply care about him, and as they continued on, the center of the galaxy was changing, as Chancellor Dooku had become the most powerful leader the Republic had seen in generations. When he first took office, after the assassination of Palpatine, many believed he would just guide the government through the temporary crisis. Instead, his leadership, his commanding presence, reshaped the entire landscape of the Republic. The Senates on Coruscant had once been filled with endless debate, but under Dooku's rule, things moved much quicker. Laws were passed easier, trade routes stabilized, piracy was pushed back in many of the sectors. Systems that were once ignored saw organized relief efforts and new security patrols. To the people of the Republic, Dooku appeared to be exactly the leader that the galaxy needed. But the passing years slowly worn down his strength, leaving him less formidable than he ever had once been. And where the younger version of himself may have truly tried to make a better galaxy in this rule, the dark side began truly fueling him, sustaining him, and it made him crave more and more power. And soon, Dooku wanted to replace the Republic itself. The Senate continued to function, but more and more authority would flow to the office of the Chancellor. And eventually, some senators would speak quietly among themselves about the growing influence of the Sith Order. Others questioned how quickly the Republic had surrendered so much authority to one man that once left the Republic altogether. Yet those concerns rarely reached the larger Senate floor. Dooku's political skills ensured that opposition remained scattered and ineffective. And only one problem continued to trouble him. Anakin Skywalker was alive, and somewhere, deep within the dark currents of the Force, Dooku could feel something else beginning to grow. The power of Skywalker had only gotten stronger. Dooku planned to reunite with Trilla very soon. But to the small group within the Senate, the rise of Dooku's power could only be ignored for so long, and among these senators were Bail Organa, Padme Amidala, and Mon Mothma. They'd watched Dooku carefully since his rise. They knew he could not be trusted. And across the Outer Rim, stories were spreading of warriors who brought peace to struggling worlds. The senators knew who those stories sounded like. Jedi. Like what Jedi were truly meant to be, what they used to be. Bail Organa suggested that the Jedi might represent the only force in the galaxy capable of standing against the growing tyranny of the Chancellor. So, officially, their visit to Ontotho would be framed as a diplomatic inspection of the planet's new government. The Senate had recently approved funding to help rebuild the world after the collapse of the criminals here, but privately, this group of senators hoped to learn the truth behind the rumors. And within days of their arrival, Anakin and Trilla learned the powerful figures from the Senate had arrived. At first, Anakin was absurdly cautious. He'd spent years avoiding attention of the Republic, but the Force felt different about these visitors, and when he finally did choose to meet them, the encounter would change everything. Bail, Padme, and Mon listened carefully as Anakin explained what had happened to the Jedi Order and how the galaxy had been manipulated by Dooku and the Sith. Each of them had already suspected that something darker was happening behind the Chancellor's rise, and from here, Ontotho became a quiet gathering place for those who opposed the growing influence of the Chancellor. Slowly, a network began forming, the foundation of a rebellion. But while Anakin worked alongside the senators and continued to train Trilla, the conflict inside of her continued to grow. Each passing day made her bond with Anakin stronger. Each moment she spent helping build up Ontotho made the Sith teachings she once followed feel more distant. And yet, the mission she'd been given still existed. It was the easy way out to go back to Dooku, so she hid her true feelings away. And late one night, Trilla contacted her master, Dooku, and she told him exactly what was being built on Ontotho. Dooku listened, telling her she has done well, and soon she will join him once more. He will personally lead the coming attack, and everything Anakin loves will die. And for some reason, when the message ended, Trilla wondered if that included her. The attack would come at dawn, when the first alarm sounded across the valley. Ships were tearing through the clouds as they descended toward the settlements below. Resistance fighters who'd been building defenses for months rushed into position as the landing craft struck the ground. Ramps dropped down and figures in dark robes ignited red blades as nearly 50 warriors of the Sith Order spread out across the forests surrounding the settlement. And at the center of the Dark Force was Dooku himself. The dark side sustained him now, and he carried power that had grown darker and stronger with each passing year. Inside the command center overlooking the valley, Anakin Skywalker stood silently as the Sith forces arrived. Through the Force, he could feel the chaos beginning to unfold outside. Fear, anger, and determination, it all surged through the fighters who'd gathered here on Ontotho to oppose the growing power of Dooku. And behind him, Trilla stood quietly. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, and when Anakin finally turned to face her, there was no anger, only exhaustion and disappointment. He told her quietly that since the moment that she'd knelt before him on Harun Kal, he'd known the truth hidden inside of her. When he reached into the Force to understand her, he felt the deception she carried. The knowledge never left him. Yet, he'd chosen to train her anyway. Beneath the layers of anger and manipulation, he'd felt something else in her spirit. Something small but real. The same light that Qui-Gon had once seen in him. He admitted that he truly believed that their bond had become genuine over the time that they'd spent traveling and training together. He believed that somewhere along the way, she began choosing her own path instead of Dooku's. But the arrival of the Sith army outside just proves how wrong he's been. Without accusing her or raising his voice, Anakin apologized for failing her. He trusted too much in the belief that someone raised in darkness could still walk into the light. And then he said he must fight, and he wishes it was with her by his side. With that, Anakin turned away, leaving her alone in the room as the sounds of battle only grew outside. The blaster fire echoed through the forests all around the settlement as the fighters clashed with the advancing Sith warriors. Explosions shook the ground. The red glow of lightsabers flashed through smoke as the Sith cut their way through the outer defenses. Inside the command center, Trilla was frozen where Anakin left her. His words echoed in her mind. He'd known the truth about her from the beginning. The mission Dooku had given her had never been hidden from him. Yet, he'd taken her in, trained her, trusted her. He'd brought her back to Ontotho, helped free the world, given her the chance to see her family again. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her as more than a weapon, and she still went back to Dooku. The conflict inside of her, finally, would break. Closing her eyes, Trilla reached into the Force. The darkness she'd been taught to embrace lingered, whispering the promises Dooku filled her mind with: power, control. But beneath those whispers was something far stronger, the fear of what would happen if she let herself be open and join Anakin couldn't hold her back any longer. She saw the faces of the people celebrating on Ontotho the night their world was freed, the relief in her family's eyes when they saw her return. She felt the bond she'd formed with the man who trained her, and when she opened her eyes again, the choice was clear. Trilla ignited her lightsaber, running toward the battlefield. The tide of the battle began to shift as the Sith pushed deeper into the Resistance defenses. But the moment Trilla arrived in the fight, confusion spread through the ranks. And across the valley, Anakin felt the shift in the Force. Their eyes met across the battlefield for only a moment before they moved forward together. Side by side, Master and Padawan cut through the Sith forces until they came upon Dooku waiting on a ridge overlooking the fight. The two Jedi stood against the Sith Lord. Anakin nodded to his Padawan as Dooku realized that she has betrayed him, and they pressed forward side by side, striking high, low with the aggressive style that Qui-Gon once refined in him. Dooku met each blow with calm moves, turning the attacks aside and redirecting Anakin's power, as Trilla moved differently than Dooku trained her. Her style blended the disciplined control that Anakin taught her with the fast, instinctive aggression she once used as a Sith. When Anakin drove Dooku back with a heavy strike, Trilla lunged from the side, forcing him to leap away to avoid being cut down. But Dooku's mastery would soon begin to show. With a quick twist of the Force, he pushed Trilla backward, then pivoted, striking at Anakin, slashing across his side, sending him crashing to one knee as pain surged through him. Dooku turned toward the wounded Jedi, preparing to finish the duel, but Trilla stepped between them. She locked eyes with Dooku, knowing this was the right choice. She reached into the Force not through anger, but through the calm that he'd taught her to find. The fear vanished. The world grew quiet. When she moved again, it was with complete clarity. Dooku attacked, but this time, Trilla read every motion before it happened, and she slipped past his first strike, redirected the second, then spun inside his attacks before he could recover. Her blade swept upward in a clean arc that drove straight through his chest, and Dooku froze for a single moment, as if watching the future Empire burn away before collapsing onto the stone ground. Across the battlefield below, the effect would be immediate. The dark pressure that had been guiding the Sith army vanished. Dooku's battle meditation shattered with his death, and the warriors below felt the full weight of their own fear for the first time. Their confidence collapsed into panic, and across the valley, the Sith broke formation and fled to their ships, abandoning the battlefield in chaos as the Resistance fighters moved in pursuit. On the ridge above, Trilla stood over the body of Dooku as Anakin slowly rose beside her. The Sith Lord who destroyed the Jedi was gone, and Trilla asked Anakin if he knew she was going to come back to him. Anakin just smiled and said they have much to do. Trilla was more than happy with her choice. The death of Dooku marked a new era. With the Sith Order shattered into exile and the Chancellor gone, the Republic saw Bail Organa, Padme Amidala, and Mon Mothma step forward, helping to guide the Senate through the long process of reform. Emergency powers dissolved, and worlds that had once been forced into submission were given back their autonomy. Ontotho was a symbol across the galaxy, not just as the world where the Sith were eventually defeated, but as the place where the people saw that resistance to tyranny was possible. Anakin and Trilla did not take power or claim any authority within a new republic, but instead they remained what Qui-Gon had intended, guardians who listened to the Force and moved where they were needed. Years passed, and the rule of two endured. Anakin would train Trilla fully over the years, over the decades, and when the time came, Anakin passed into the Force. His spirit remained in the living Force, just as Qui-Gon's before him, and Trilla carried the light forward, taking a Padawan of her own and continuing the quiet work of helping these worlds find balance and peace. Decades turned into centuries. The pattern continued. One master, one apprentice. When a master's time came, they would fade into the Force, leaving the future in the hands of the one that they'd trained. And though the galaxy changed again and again with the passing of generations, the light never vanished, because those who became one with the Force never truly left. The spirits of Qui-Gon, Anakin, Trilla, and the many Jedi who followed them washed over the Order that had grown from their choices. In quiet moments, new apprentices would sometimes feel their presence guiding them, reminding them that the light was never meant to dominate the galaxy, only to endure. And through the rule of two, it did.